Wonderful. Yes, I will show some pictures. If you can't quite see all of the pictures, don't worry. I can also give you a link where you can see all the pictures. The people on Zoom, you're going to see the pictures really well, but you won't see me, so that's all right. Anyway, so yes, so where we're going to start is with a little reading, words of the Buddha on why to go on pilgrimage. And Sylvia's going to do that. Okay, let's close our eyes. You just need to hear me. Connect with your postures. There are 4 places, Ananda, that a pious person should visit and look upon with feelings of reverence. What are the 4? Here, the Tathagata was born. This, Ananda, is a place that a pious person should visit and look upon with feelings of reverence. Here, the Tathagata became fully enlightened in an unsurpassed supreme enlightenment. This, Ananda, is a place that a pious person should visit and look upon with feelings of reverence. Here, the Tathagata sat rolling the unexcelled wheel of the Dhamma. This, Ananda, is a place that a pious person should visit and look upon with feelings of reverence. Here, the Tathagata passed away into the state of Nibbana, in which no element of clinging remains. This, Ananda, is a place that a pious person should visit and look upon with feelings of reverence. These, Ananda, are the 4 places that a pious person should visit and look upon with feelings of reverence. And truly, there will come to these places, Ananda, pious bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, laymen and laywomen reflecting. Here, the Tathagata was born. Here, the Tathagata became fully enlightened in an unsurpassed supreme enlightenment. Here, the Tathagata sat rolling the unexcelled wheel of the Dhamma. Here, the Tathagata passed away into the state of Nibbana, in which no element of clinging remains. Great, so what we've just heard is the Buddha speaking shortly before his death and parinirvana to his disciple on the topic of pilgrimage. So I had the very good fortune to be able to go on pilgrimage earlier this year. And this pilgrimage was organized by the Ipswich Sangha, so like a Buddhist center like here, but in Ipswich, and 3 Indian order members who organized it for us locally. And they had been planning for a while to go since pre-pandemic and had to postpone it several times, so that by the time they could actually make the travel, some people couldn't go anymore. So some random people like me that not living in Ipswich were able to come along. So that was my good fortune. And actually, it's Buddha Day in Ipswich today as well, and they'll be talking about the pilgrimage as well. And so, yeah, we wished each other luck this morning. And yeah, it's really lovely to share this experience. So this map, which you can or can't see, it's a map of India and Nepal. It sort of describes our itinerary. So my pilgrimage was 5 weeks long, and it had 3 stages. And the first stage, we were mostly in Maharashtra, and we visited a lot parts of our movement, the Triratna movement in India, because there is quite a lot of Indian brothers and sisters there that are doing various projects.
And we also visited a lot of caves in which Buddhists have been practicing in ancient times. And these caves are very beautiful. So we visited those as well. So that was the first part of our pilgrimage. In the second part of our pilgrimage, we were in the land where the Buddha walked. The Buddha walked about quite far distances. We mostly drove by bus. And we saw not just the 4 sites that Sylvia just read out, but also other sites to do with the Buddha's life. And these are the places I will mainly focus on in this talk. And then in the third part of our pilgrimage, we went up to Darjeeling and Kalimpong. Kalimpong is a place where the founder of our movement, Sangharakshita, spent a lot of time, and that's been really important to him. And then we went up to Sikkim, which is very close to the border of which, basically Tibet, which would have been Tibet, and has a lot of Tibetan practitioners and influence there. Particularly to do with Padmasambhava. And so these were the 3 parts of our pilgrimage. And as you can see, we sort of went from Mumbai. We basically sort of crossed India, more or less. We were briefly in Nepal, and then we went to loads of places to do with the Buddha, and then up to Sikkim, and then we went back again. So we went through, I think, 6 or 7 states, 4 overnight trains, many hours on the bus. Okay, so I will start with the places of the Buddha's life just chronologically, which is not the way we visited them. We visited them the way we encountered them, but just for ease of the story, I will start in Lumbini. So Lumbini is a place in, nowadays it's Nepal. And as the story goes, so the Buddha's parents, who were not quite king and queen, but they were the leaders of their people at that time. So his mother was pregnant. And there is a tradition in India, which I think in some areas also still exists today, that when you're pregnant, you give birth at your parents' place. So Queen Mahadevi was on the way to her parents' place when she had to rest, and when I think she leaned on a tree, and then the Buddha stepped out of her sight and did a few steps. So that was how Siddhartha was born before he became the Buddha. And this happened in Lumbini, and this is the Mahadevi temple, which marks this site. And inside, I don't have a picture inside. So some of these places you can't take pictures, yeah? So inside there is a stone that marks the exact location. And you can walk around some ruins that are around there. Inside this outer building of the old temple, and then there is a place where you can make offerings. You might be able to sort of hear some prayer flags in the background, and it's quite a big area. And it was very moving to be there. It was very moving to be there. So we did a bit of like walking meditation, we chanted, and then we paid our respects at this stone that marked the exact site of the birth of Siddhartha. And so it's also, nowadays it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but also this place was recognized a long time ago. So there is an Ashoka pillar. So the Ashoka was an emperor in ancient Indian times that was converted to Buddhism, and then really wanted to work for the benefit of Buddhism. And he built a lot of these pillars in places that are significant to Buddhists. And so there is this pillar here, and nowadays it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And it's quite a big, you really get a bit of a sense that it was probably in the middle of nowhere. There wasn't a lot around. And nowadays it's become this really big area with like loads of temples, and they've built a canal, and it's sort of, it's a bit unbelievable in a way. It's quite particular in the way it's sort of set out. And there are lots of tourists, and some of them are Buddhists, and some of them are just in Nepal, and obviously local people and visiting. So it's quite busy, but it doesn't feel like a place where primarily there is Buddhist sort of practice or reverence happening. It's sort of like quite mixed. And I hadn't come across this before, but I think they sort of like chose as a sort of like emblem this walking Buddha. So I think probably an image from when he just stepped out of the side of his mother. And anyway, so that's the baby Buddha. And what's also quite striking is that loads of Buddhist traditions have like little temples around there. They feel a bit like embassies. Like you can find like there are different Tibetan and Nepalese and all sorts of other temples. And it's quite an interesting area worth exploring. So that was Lumbini and the area around Lumbini in Nepal. And I think this already brings us to the next stage in the life of the Buddha. So this is not one of the major pilgrimage sites, but it nevertheless felt very, very significant. And so I did want to talk about it. So where the Buddha grew up is Kapilavastu. And nowadays, that's an area that's sort of in between India and Nepal. And so there is an Indian sort of Kapilavastu, and there's a Nepalese Kapilavastu. And it's quite interesting when you look into the history of it, the more recent history, there was a bit like an archaeological thriller of who has the actual site of the palace of where the Buddha used to grow up, or like Siddhartha used to grow up. It really involves like fake relics and destroyed monuments and all sorts of back and forth. And so we went to a site in India which had like a stupa, so a Buddhist monument where usually relics are enshrined. And then we went to the Nepalese Kapilavastu, and that was quite something because it's this park. And it's got some old ruins. They don't quite go back to the time of the Buddha. They're more recent, but it is thought that this might actually have been the place where the palace was. So they had some research project going on there with also the University of Durham or whatever, and they had done some excavations. And they'd also trained some of the guides. We had a very, very knowledgeable guide showing us around. And just imagine this park, maybe a bit like Victoria Park, on a bank holiday, lots of young people milling around. And then you come across these ruins. And there are lots of prayer flags. And then you can see, this is where we're all standing. We had these blue curtains on most of the pilgrimage. The Eastern Gate. The Eastern Gate is where the Buddha left his life, his family, his wife, his children. And on that night when he decided to leave, in search of the truth. So there's this whole story about how he grew up quite protected. But then he had these three sides, an old person, a sick person, and a dead person. And it sort of made him wonder. And then he saw a holy person, and that sort of, in a way, showed him that there might be something else to search for. And so one night when he decided to leave, there's these really beautiful pictures sometimes of he's leaving on a horse, and I think there are like birds or like devas attached to each of the hooves of the horse, so it doesn't make any sound, so he can actually leave without being discovered. And this place really, I think for all of us in pilgrimage, was quite a strong place, just because it embodies this quality of going forth, of leaving what's familiar, but not quite knowing where you're going. So we did a little ritual there. So often rather than practicing in a shrine room like here, we were actually sitting wherever the monuments were, outside, doing our chanting, our meditation, our puja. And yeah, it's quite particular because there are other people, there's the weather, it might be hot or foggy or whatever. You might be able to see there are a few people watching us over here. Sometimes we had people joining in. But yeah, we did a ritual, and yeah, it felt like it was quite a special moment during the pilgrimage. So yeah, so that's the place of the going forth of the Buddha. Yes, and then Bodh Gaya, the place of the Buddha's enlightenment. So as the story goes, the Buddha went forth. He tried to find a teacher that would tell him, how to gain realization, how to gain liberation. And he tried out different teachers, and every time he would sort of like eventually get to their level of meditation attainment, and they couldn't teach him anything more, and then he would have to wander on. And then he tried out practicing with some ascetics, and he was really not eating much and was almost starving. And eventually he decided, no, that's also not going to give me liberation. And so he decided to eat and try something else. And eventually he found this tree, the Bodhi tree, and he just sat down under the Bodhi tree and decided to just stay there and meditate until something would happen. And some people of you might know the story of Mara, the sort of like demon or personified ghost assailing him during that time. And then the earth goddess, in a way, witnessing, vouching for all the practice he had done up to this moment. And then that night he attained enlightenment. And so this happened in Bodh Gaya, and it's quite interesting. So we got there. It was, I think, another long bus ride. We arrived quite late in the evening. I think we had dinner at like 10 p.m. or something. We hadn't quite got to our hotel yet. And then the next morning we were sort of like, okay, let's try to meditate at the temple, which is just next to the Bodhi tree. And we were all a bit sort of like sleep deprived, and we started walking there. And the closer we got, the more people were walking there, sort of like monks and lay people and loads of people. It was very different from other sites that we had been to, which felt a bit more like a museum. And then we got to the gates, and there's this airport-like security check. Unfortunately, because there had been a terrorist attack some years past. And then we got through that, and then eventually we were in the Bodh Gaya area and by the temple. And I'm going to show you some pictures, which so you can't or you're not allowed to bring electronic devices unless you've got a special permit. And one of our pilgrims, Eric, luckily he got the special permit and took some pictures with a really nice camera. So just on this day, there was like this huge group of women, I think from Korea. So for us, the airport style security took quite a long time because we were at the end of that queue. And you can sort of see the area with like all the decorations. There was some Tibetan puja going on, and then loads of people there. And every square meter, there are people sitting down, praying, prostrating, doing puja. Some people circumambulate the whole area, prostrating. It's quite an amazing atmosphere, and like people from all over the Buddhist world doing their particular ritual in their particular language. And so when we were there was quite a big Tibetan puja. So that was then on loudspeakers. So there would be like this monotonous, like Tibetan chant going on in the background with like some Tibetan instruments ever so often. So it wasn't quiet. And this is the actual temple. And I don't know, I mean, for me, it looks like something, I can't really compare it with anything, but Yeah, exactly. It looks a bit like something that maybe aliens left on this planet, but obviously it isn't. It isn't. And the space inside is very, very small. So the space, there is not a lot of space inside. So people queue and give offerings, and the queue to give offerings is so long and so steady that ever so often they have to sort of like a drop-off place to put all the offerings, because they don't actually fit in the actual temple. And then ever so often what also happens is, like, you give an offering and the monk will actually throw something back at you. So I brought this cloth. This is from the Mahabodhi temple, which is on our shrine today. And and there we were. And on that morning, we didn't even find a place to actually all sit together and meditate, let alone quietly. We were perching on one side on like some stairs somewhere. But for me, I had a really strong urge to come back and just prostrate. A lot of people do prostrations, and I had a very strong urge to do that. So after breakfast, I came back and I did my 108 prostrations in the midday sun, which isn't quite the recommended thing, but there was just, I don't know, there is a sort of atmosphere and magnetism about this place that just, really does have a big effect on people, certainly on me. I know this is the Bodhi tree, or the successor of the Bodhi tree, and obviously it's decorated, and spaces to meditate on either side of the Bodhi tree are super popular, and people sit there, do their meditation, they're chanting. A few of us were just a bit round the corner where there is a big step and where we did our prostrations. And so it's not quiet, but it's a calm atmosphere that just ever so often, when a Bodhi tree leaf comes down, there's a slight sort of like, who gets it? Anyway. So that's the Bodhi tree. And another, so this is Bodhi Vamsa, who was leading our pilgrimage. He is also meditating there. And there is a wider area, for example, with this lake, with the Muchalinda figure, and like loads and loads and loads of prayer flags, even more than you can see on this picture. So I think there's also just something about like flowers and petals and decorations everywhere and steadily redone, and just a sense of reverence, basically, that is there. And we were very, very lucky because some people from our tradition were doing a retreat while we were there. So an order member called Subhuti was leading a retreat on what's called the Formula Yogas, particularly the mandala offering practice. And so we were able to join the puja in the evening, and it was such a magical experience. So, some of our Indian brothers and sisters, they will obviously practice in Hindi or Marathi, and we practice in English. And so the puja was sort of like in English, Hindi, and Pali, and it was quite special to sit together with them. But then also we were doing this as the sun was setting, and the lights all came on, and also, or you could see the lights more. And also there is this butter lamp procession in the evening. So loads of people taking a butter lamp, chanting, and then sort of processing to the butter lamp house. And so this procession would start, and everybody just chants in their language, the prayer or chant they're just doing. And it was just very, very magical. It was, a very lovely moment. So that's the butter lamps, and there were like hundreds and hundreds of them. And also, just when we were there, they were actually presenting some relics of the Buddha and two of his main disciples, Shariputra and Mogayana. And just out of curiosity, I went there to just see what that's like, basically. And So it was happening in a particular building, and it was quite a long queue of, again, like loads of people from loads of places. And when you got closer, they had these three, I guess, reliquaries, the sort of vessels where they kept them. And as you got closer, one of the monks would show you with like a closed lotus petal, a tiny, maybe like something like it looked like maybe like a rice corn, but whatever, and that would be the relic. And yeah, it's just part of this whole experience in a way. So that was Bodh Gaya. And then to continue with the story of the Buddha. So he had this quite big experience of really looking into the nature of reality and realizing the Four Noble Truths. And it took a while for him to sort of like absorb that experience. So he sat there and he just absorbed it. And with time, the question came like, would he even be able to communicate his realization to other people? Because it's really difficult to put in words, and will people actually be ready? And this, well, you could look at it sort of like a god appeared and said to him like, "Oh no, don't give up, Buddha, don't give up. Actually, there are people with just like a little bit of dust in their eyes, and they will be able to hear you. So some people will be able to hear you and understand. So please try and communicate your realization." And and he took that to heart. And in the first instance, he was thinking about going back to his old teachers, but one of them had died, and that wasn't really an option to go back to them. So he thought back to the people he was practicing austerities with. So obviously, they were trying to not eat anything, and he had gone off, had some nice sort of like porridge, and so he wasn't quite sure how they would react, but he thought he would definitely try. And when they saw him approach, they were like, "Oh yeah, there's this guy again, he sort of like decided to eat, we're not sure about him, we're definitely not going to prostrate." But as he came closer, there was just something about him, like he didn't even have to explain anything. Something just had changed about his person that really communicated itself. And so they all prostrated to him. And then he did talk about his insights, and one of the people he practiced with, he got it. And that was the first time, and subsequently also the others, and that was the first time the Dharma, the teaching of the Buddha were taught, and that was it's sometimes referred to as the turning of the wheel of the Dharma. And this happened in this place, Sarnath, which is next, or not next to, but it's near Varanasi, basically. And there is a stupa, which looks like this. So again, like a Buddhist monument, and again, this place, sort of like quite a quiet place, like a few pilgrimage groups going there, but overall, it's quite a quiet place again, at least when we were there. And that was also when some of our pilgrims, because not everybody could stay for 5 weeks, some of them left, so it was a bit of a sad day when we were there. But we also visited some other places. There might be another picture of this actually. Oh yeah, so there's just some explanation of the site, which has also the place where the Buddha is thought to have been sitting, and loads of like stupas and little monuments around. So again, it's like quite a big complex with different ruins and that sort of stuff. Yes. Like this, for example. So there are loads of these, which are probably, I'm guessing, associated with like disciples and people who have been practicing there over time. Another place we also went to is Vulture's Peak, which some of you might actually have heard of just from reading Buddhist texts. Some of them happen at Vulture's Peak, where they meet and the Buddha teaches. And again, it was quite an interesting day because we'd been we first went to Nalanda and then we went to Vulture's Peak. We were running a little bit late. It's not like a peak, really like the top of a mountain, but it's sort of, you have to go up and it's hot and it takes people a little bit of time. And so we were running slightly late in order to get there. And then when we got there was this other massive pilgrimage group doing like quite an elaborate ritual. And so we didn't actually start our ritual until quite late. Anyway, we'll show you some pictures. So there is this, you can get up there if you don't want to walk with this, it's not called a funicular, but like this, what's it called? Cable car, exactly. And then you've got the view. Here's the other pilgrimage group, sun slowly setting. Also on the way, you find some caves where the Buddha and some of his disciples used to practice in. So that's the sort of whole environment. And yes, and that's the sort of in a way the shrine. And that's some of us that were waiting up there for everyone to arrive. And yes, yes, and so we are by the time we had actually done our puja, it was getting dark. And in fact, we were the last ones to leave the place and to go down on that day. And we had like a military escort basically to walk down the mountain and safely get to our bus, which apparently is a thing. But so unintentionally in the beginning, it was sort of like, oh, we're running late, oh, now these other people are there. But then it was actually the most beautiful ritual, actually, just because the sun was setting as we were chanting. And it was quite a special moment being up there on Vulture's Peak. And yes, so I think this, is... So towards the end of the Buddha's life, he did actually announce that he would die and pass into the final nirvana. And I mean, people were really bereft, and in a way they didn't want to part from his side anymore. They just walked wherever he walked, and eventually he was sort of like, look, I'm going to this town and that's where it's going to happen, and I can't take all of you with you. I give you my bowl, please stay here and I'll go there. And yes, and then there are various sort of like episodes associated with at the end of his life where he gave some teachings, for example, the one that Sylvia read out at the beginning about the pilgrimage. But also there are places that you can go to that are particularly associated with the last meal he ate, the last time he drank, all that sort of thing. So we went particularly to the Mahaparinibbana temple, which is this temple. And we did a very special ritual there, which is we offered the Buddha a robe. So this is this orange cloth, which would have been the side of like a robe. And there were 23 of us, we all held onto it, and then we circumambulated the whole temple 3 times while chanting. And I think I've got some pictures of that. And it really felt like a funeral in a way. There was something very, very moving about connecting to the fact that he was actually a person and he did actually pass away as we were doing this ritual. And eventually we got into the temple, and there is this statue of the lying down Buddha, which is, most of the time if a statue shows the Buddha lying down, it's associated with a parinirvana, and it's quite big. And we offered the robe to the Buddha, and as you can see, many people do this, so there were already layers and layers. And also, if you put a donation, you can potentially get the thing that you're offered sort of back. So the Ipswich pilgrims, they actually took the robe back to Ipswich, and there was on their shrine for parinirvana. So anyway, so we were in here, and these pictures look like the temple is empty, but actually when we first entered, it was completely full. There were loads and loads of people, and we offered the robe. So that's us at the end when the temple was empty, all standing there. But the magic thing that happened is we were planning to do a puja, and so we sat down, and suddenly on the other end of the room, we heard the familiar chant of the refuges and precepts that chanted the way our Indian brothers and sisters would chant it. And so we joined in, and then they chanted the Buddha Puja as well, which I will hopefully chant at the end of this presentation. And yeah, that was just this moment of connection without even knowing each other, just by being Buddhist practitioners, which was really, really quite magical. So that is, and yeah, that's our pilgrimage group. So we all have or most of us, the group that is. And we were just spent some time outside of the temple and just reading some of the stories from like the Mahaparinirvana Sutta. So that was, so for us, when we got there, I think this was actually before we went to Bodh Gaya. So we had to live through like the death of the Buddha to then celebrate his enlightenment, which was slightly odd, but that's just how it all worked out in terms of time and geography. I do want to briefly just give you a bit of a taste of some of the other places that we went to. So one very special place is Sanchi. Sanchi is one of the places where the relics of the Buddha were originally enshrined in a very big stupa. And it's a bit difficult to get to. We had to take 2 consecutive night trains, which was not the favorite part of anyone's travel, but we got there. And it's massive. And it's got this whole big site with like loads of stupas, big and small. This one has 3 umbrellas to show that. So in the early Buddhism, they didn't actually paint pictures of the Buddha. They had symbols, for example, the footsteps, some of you might know, but also the umbrellas, and 3 umbrellas means the Buddha. So it's this massive site, and they have these gates. This is, again, not the original stupa, but one that was built on top of that. That was, I think, partly also built by Ashoka, and these gates are extremely beautiful, and some of them are very well preserved from, like, I think, 300 BC. And we were sitting there, and just, it really felt like having a chat with the Buddha, like in a way that's just, I don't know, sitting at home or even on a retreat center doesn't quite do. And I think that's sort of like one of the main things that stuck with me from the pilgrimage. Like some of these places, it's much easier to connect with a sense of knowing that liberation is possible. It's possible for me, it's possible for all beings. It's much easier to connect with that knowing than at home or in other moments, basically. And there were several of these moments where I really felt in touch with those, and that was also what others experienced. And I think that's sort of the magic of pilgrimage. Yeah, this is just one of the gates, and it shows like various little episodes from the life of the Buddha, and I mean, it's quite amazing to think that this is so old but so well preserved, basically. And here you've got the footsteps, and this is, I think, the temple where some of you might remember, if you've read Sangharakshita's autobiography, there was this where they were getting some relics back from the V&A Museum, and they sort of toured around India. This is where these relics finally were put into, and it's in Sanchi. Anyway, so that's that. Yeah, and then we also connected a little bit with like Buddhist practice after the Buddha died, and I just want to draw out, I think, 3 aspects of that. So the first one is, Dr. Ambedkar. And it's quite interesting. So this is the sort of mausoleum where Dr. Ambedkar was buried, and it's no coincidence that it looks like Sanchi. It's like he's regarded as a bodhisattva in a way. And yes, for those of you who don't know who Dr. Ambedkar was, he was a leader of the formerly called Untouchables, and he was trying to basically right rights for them, including him, he was one of them, into the constitution. And there were various issues with that. And in the end, he fell out in a way. He didn't believe in the political process anymore. And he said, like, okay, really, if we want to leave discrimination, we have to convert to Buddhism. And so in India, after like hundreds of years where there were barely any Buddhist practitioners or like Buddhists, there were suddenly again millions of Buddhists through mass conversion. And wherever we went, like Buddha statues, pictures, Buddha statues, statues of Dr. Ambedkar, pictures of Dr. Ambedkar, the walking Buddha, because Dr. Ambedkar said he likes a walking Buddha better than a sitting Buddha because it's about being active in the world. Whereas in Nagpur, this massive, it's like a conference hall with a big picture of him. Like when we went to a kind of Buddhist center in Pune, they also had a Dr. Ambedkar there. So wherever we were, he was sort of present, and just very, very important, I guess, particularly for the Indian movement. And then I have mentioned the caves. This could be its own talk, but how amazing to really be in some of the places where people built temples into mountains and practiced in them. Very, very, very special. Anyway, that's for another day. And finally, also, the Tibetan lineages, in a way. I mean, some of the presence of Tibetans is, I guess, associated with the invasion of China into Tibet, but also in some places since hundreds of years, like 400 years, there has been a practice of particular Tibetan lineages in Sikkim, for example. And it was amazing to see this. This is the first Padmasambhava that Sangharakshita ever saw. So some of you might remember that from his autobiography. There's a very, very big Padmasambhava, I think like 30 meters high or something like that. We saw a Shakya lineage monastery with a very friendly Lama who showed us around. That was very, very friendly. We saw the Sikkimese royal chapel. We were just like in lots of places. And just an appreciation of like the lineage where some of the practices that we've been practicing have come from through Sangharakshita and Sangharakshita's teachers. So that's that. And finally, I mean, I can't do this talk without talking about just like all the people we met. I mean, it was amazing. We had 3 extremely just like caring and warm-hearted guides who really looked after us super well. We met lots of people who practice in our tradition. We met Buddhists of all kinds. We met just random people who were curious. And it was really just really lovely. We got invited to people's homes. And anyway, before I cry, I'm just gonna swiftly move on.